At 9:27 a.m. on December 13, 1943, Second Lieutenant Philip Adair banked his Curtiss P40N Warhawk into a climbing turn over the mist-shrouded hills of Assam, India. The cool morning air rushed past the canopy as he scanned the horizon, a routine part of his patrol duties, until a dark swarm materialized through the golden-tinged haze. 64 Japanese warplanes emerged 3 miles to the east, their silhouettes stark against the dawn sky, Jingji streaking toward his base at Denjan Airfield. The 23-year-old pilot, his hands calloused from months of gripping the control stick, had already logged 43 combat sorties with the 89th Fighter Squadron, tasked with safeguarding the vital hump airlift that kept Allied forces supplied in China. But on this fateful morning, as the enemy formation grew larger and more menacing by the second, he realized with a sinking feeling that he was the sole Allied pilot airborne to meet them. Over the preceding 8 weeks, Japanese raids on Allied airfields across northeastern India had destroyed 47 transport planes on the ground and claimed 112 lives. Adair's P40, affectionately named Lulu Bell and marked with the number 44, was armed with 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, carrying just enough ammunition for roughly 12 seconds of continuous fire. The incoming enemy force consisted of 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers, escorted by some 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters layered above and below the bomber stream. Intelligence briefings had warned that similarly sized raids in Burma had achieved a 90% hit rate on undefended airfields. Below Adair, Denjan Airfield housed 14 C-47 transport planes loaded with critical supplies for Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China, a field hospital treating 63 wounded soldiers, and fuel reserves sufficient to sustain hump operations for 11 days. If the bombers reached the field unimpeded, the damage would cripple Allied supply efforts over the Himalayas for weeks. The nearest friendly fighters were 38 minutes away at their base in Jorhat. Adair checked his fuel gauge. Full internal tanks holding 180 gallons, enough for approximately 90 minutes of flight at combat power. The Japanese formation was 3,000 feet below him, advancing toward the airfield at 240 miles per hour. Military doctrine dictated that fighter pilots should wait for reinforcements when outnumbered more than 5 to 1. Adair faced odds of 64 to 1. He had 2 choices, each weighing heavy on his mind: radio for help and shadow the formation until backup arrived, knowing full well that by then the bombs would already be raining down on Denyan's vulnerable facilities, or launch a solo attack, a desperate gamble to disrupt their bombing run before it began. Adair's jaw tightened. There was no real choice at all. He pushed the throttle forward, the control stick vibrating beneath his palm as his Allison V1710 engine roared to life, a guttural growl cutting through the air. Manifold pressure climbed to 54 inches as the P40 accelerated to 320 miles per hour, the wind screaming louder as he gained speed. He positioned himself 4,000 feet above the bomber formation, approaching from the south with the sun low at his back, hiding his silhouette, keeping him undetected. The Oscars' attention was fixed intently on the target ahead, their pilots likely confident that no resistance would reach them this far from the airfield. They expected Allied fighters to engage near Denjan, not 20 miles out. Surprise, Adair knew, was his only advantage, and he intended to wield it with everything he had. Adair mapped out his attack plan. Strike the lead bomber formation first, ignore the fighters initially, shatter their bombing accuracy, scatter their ranks, and force them to abort the mission. Could one P-40 disrupt 64 Japanese aircraft? Hit the like button to find out how this unfolds, subscribe for more untold war stories, and let's get back to Adair's desperate fight. The lead Sally bomber group flew in a tight, unwavering formation. 6 aircraft arranged in 2 precise V-shaped formations of 3, their wings almost touching as they advanced in lockstep. Adair took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, then rolled his P-40 inverted, the world flipping upside down as the jungle below became the sky above. He pulled the nose down, sending the fighter into a steep dive toward the bombers from their 7 o'clock high position. His airspeed surged relentlessly, 340 miles per hour, 360 miles per hour. the wind tearing at the aircraft as the Allison engine screamed at full power, its pitch rising to a deafening whine. The distance closed rapidly, the bombers growing larger in his windscreen by the second, but the enemy crews remained blissfully unaware of the danger hurtling toward them. At 800 yards, Adair's finger tightened on the trigger. His .50 caliber guns erupted in a furious barrage, tracers arcing through the morning air like fiery streaks toward the lead bomber. The rounds walked up the Sally's left wing, tearing through the fabric covering with a series of sharp, cracking sounds, sparks flying as metal met metal. In an instant, the bomber's port engine erupted in a brilliant orange flame, black smoke billowing from the cowling in a thick, choking cloud. The tight formation shattered like glass. Bombers veered left and right, their pilots panicking as they fought to avoid collision, the once perfect V dissolving into chaos. Adair pulled up sharply, the 7 Gs of acceleration crushing him into his seat, his vision narrowing as blood rushed from his head. He rolled right, and in that split second he saw them. 40 Oscar fighters, their wings glinting in the sun, diving toward him in a swarm, their guns already spitting fire. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar was one of the most maneuverable fighters in the Pacific Theater. Powered by a 1,150 horsepower Nakajima HA-115 engine, it could reach 329 miles per hour at 13,000 feet and execute tighter turns than any American fighter. Its butterfly combat flaps allowed it to bleed speed rapidly during turns without stalling, an advantage Japanese pilots exploited relentlessly. Over the previous 6 months, Oscars had shot down 63 Allied fighters over Burma and northeastern India. Adair's P40N was faster in a straight line, but couldn't match the Oscar's turn rate. The Warhawk's Allison V1710-81 engine generated 1,240 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, giving it a top speed of 378 miles per hour below 12,000 feet. But in a sustained turning dogfight, the heavier American fighter would lose energy far quicker than the lightweight Japanese aircraft. Standard P40 tactics against Oscars were simple. Never turn with them, use speed for hit-and-run attacks, extend away, and reset. But Adair couldn't retreat. Fleeing would let the bombers reform and complete their attack on Denjan. He had to keep pressure on the formation, keep them scattered and nervous. Even if it meant fighting 40 Oscars alone, the first 4 Oscars approached in a loose finger-4 formation from his 10 o'clock high. Adair rolled left, pulled the nose up, and fired a 2-second burst at the lead fighter. The 50 caliber rounds missed high, and the Oscar broke right, its wingman following. Adair reversed direction, diving away to maintain speed. 2 more Oscars dove from above. He spotted them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn, and fired again. No hits. His ammunition counter showed 800 rounds remaining across all 6 guns, enough for roughly 6 more attacks at his current rate of fire. Behind the fighter screen, the Sally bombers were attempting to reform, 3 groups of 6 aircraft each closing back into formation. If they re-established their bombing V, they would press the attack. Adair had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached their bomb release point over Denjan. He rolled level, slammed the throttle to the stop, and dove toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars gave chase, but the P40 accelerated to 405 miles per hour in the dive. Speed the Oscars couldn't match. Adair widened the gap, pulled out at bomber altitude, and lined up on the right-hand Sally formation. At 300 yards, he fired. Tracers converged on the lead bomber's right engine, a Mitsubishi HA-101 radial that exploded in a fireball. The bomber rolled right, trailing fire and debris, while its wingman broke formation to avoid collision. Adair kicked the rudder, skidded left, and fired at another Sally. His rounds punched through the bomber's thin fuselage. Designed in 1936, the Ki-21 was obsolete by 1943 standards, lacking crew armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. But it could still carry 2,205 pounds of bombs, enough to destroy everything at Denjan Airfield. 12 more Oscars closed in as Adair's fuel gauge showed 162 gallons remaining, and his ammunition counter read 650 rounds. The bombers were 19 miles from Denjan. He had roughly 4 minutes before they reached drop range. Then his engine began overheating. The Allison by 1710-81 was a liquid-cooled engine, with coolant circulating through cylinder heads and the engine block to absorb combustion heat before flowing through a radiator under the fuselage. At combat power settings above 50 inches of manifold pressure, the engine generated extreme temperatures, and the cooling system was only designed to handle sustained operation at those levels for about 20 minutes. Adair had been running at full power for 11 minutes, and his coolant temperature gauge showed 230 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees above normal operating temperature. At 250 degrees Fahrenheit, the engine would start to fail. He had three options: reduce power to cool the engine, abandon the attack and return to base, or keep fighting and risk engine failure over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 17 miles from Denjan, still within bombing range and a lethal threat. Adair kept the throttle forward. Two Oscars approached head-on, closing speed exceeding 600 miles per hour. Both opened fire at 500 yards, their 7.7 millimeter tracers streaking toward his nose. Adair fired back. His heavier .50 caliber rounds carried more energy and range. At 350 yards, his rounds struck the left Oscar's engine cowling. The lightweight fighter shuddered, broke left, and trailed white coolant vapor, its wingman following suit. Adair rolled right and dove as his coolant temperature hit 240 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sally bombers were 15 miles from target. Two formations of 6 had reformed into bombing Vs, while the third remained scattered, 3 bombers struggling to rejoin. Adair targeted the lead formation again. 6 Oscars tried to intercept, but he dove past them at 390 miles per hour, too fast for them to keep up. Leveling out at bomber altitude, he opened fire on the lead Sally. His first burst hit the bomber's right wing root, causing the wing structure to fail. The outer panel folded upward and tore away, sending the Sally into an inverted spin. No parachutes emerged. The crew went down with the plane. The formation shattered again, bombers scattering in 3 directions. Their bombing accuracy was ruined. Even if they dropped their payloads now, the bombs would spread across miles of jungle instead of concentrating on the airfield. Adair pulled up sharply as his coolant temperature gauge hit 248 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine ran rough, vibration trembling through the control stick. Detonation had begun in the cylinders, pre-ignition from extreme heat. If he didn't reduce power soon, the engine would seize. 8 Oscars dove on him from above. He spotted them too late, rolled left, but it wasn't fast enough. 7.7 millimeter rounds punched through his right wing, tearing fabric and buckling metal. One round hit his right aileron control rod, making the aileron unresponsive. He needed extra right stick pressure to maintain level flight. Another burst raked his fuselage, sparks flying off the engine cowling. One round penetrated the coolant reservoir behind the firewall, green coolant spraying across his windscreen. The engine temperature gauge climbed past 260 degrees Fahrenheit, steam erupting from the cowling seams as oil pressure plummeted. The Allison was dying. Adair chopped the throttle, reducing RPM from 3,000 to 2,400. But it wasn't enough to maintain altitude. The P40 began descending, 1,000 feet per minute, then 1,500. The Oscar circled above, waiting. Then the engine caught fire. Engine fires in liquid-cooled aircraft follow a predictable pattern. Burning coolant vaporizes and ignites, flames spreading forward along the engine cowling driven by airflow. If the fire reached the fuel lines running along the engine's left side, the aircraft would explode. Adair had perhaps 30 seconds. Standard procedure for engine fires was immediate shutdown and bailout. But he was only 8,000 feet above jungle, where Japanese patrols operated, descending rapidly. He kept the engine running. The Allison's fuel mixture could be adjusted manually. Adair pulled the mixture control back to idle cutoff for 3 seconds, starving the engine of fuel and reducing the fire's intensity. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and restarted, running rough but producing power, approximately 60%, enough to barely maintain level flight but not climb. He was committed: fly home on a burning, damaged engine, or abandon the plane over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 13 miles from Denjan, still close enough to turn back, but their formations had disintegrated, individual bombers heading southeast toward Burma. The raid was broken. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Naguli, 43 miles away, a 15-minute flight if the engine held. 6 Oscars followed. At 7,000 feet, his engine oil pressure dropped to 0. The Allison relied on oil pressure to lubricate its connecting rods, crankshaft, and camshaft. Without it, metal ground against metal, generating heat that caused components to expand and seize. Adair felt the engine's vibration intensify, the propeller windmilling unevenly as power faded. His airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour, only 60 miles per hour above the P40's stall speed. The Oscars closed to 400 yards but didn't fire. They watched, waiting for the engine to fail completely, for him to bail out or crash. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot gestured downward. Land, surrender, become a prisoner. Adair ignored him. At 6,000 feet, thick, acrid smoke began to fill the cockpit. Not from the engine fire, but from frayed electrical wiring damaged by the fuselage hits. The smell of burning insulation, sharp and choking. The smoke stung his eyes, forcing tears to stream down his cheeks, and burned his throat with every breath. He fumbled with the canopy lever, sliding it open with a loud clank. The rushing wind cleared some of the smoke, but the fierce slipstream made breathing nearly impossible, cold air searing his lungs. His airspeed fell to 160 miles per hour, and the Oscars, sensing his desperation, pulled back slightly, unwilling to waste ammunition on a pilot they assumed was already doomed, content to circle and wait for the inevitable. At 4,000 feet, disaster struck. Adair heard a sharp snap, and suddenly his right aileron went limp. The control cable had snapped completely, the aileron flopping to full deflection. The P40 lurched into a violent right roll, the nose dropping sharply into a steep dive. He hauled back on the control stick with both hands, muscles straining, but it was useless. Nothing happened. The elevator cables were damaged too. He had no pitch control at all. The nose stayed locked downward as airspeed surged to 250 miles per hour, the jungle rushing up at him in a green blur, the ground growing closer by the millisecond. Then he had an idea. The damaged aileron forced the right wing down, and the stuck elevator kept the nose low. Gravity and aerodynamics pulling the plane into an uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work both ways. Rolling inverted would reverse the forces, the damaged aileron would lift the right wing, and the stuck elevator would push the tail down, raising the nose. Flying upside down might save him. At 1,800 feet above the jungle, Adair rolled the P40 completely inverted. -1G pressed him against his shoulder straps, blood rushing to his head as his vision turned red at the edges. The fuel system, designed for positive G loads, struggled to feed the engine inverted. The Allison coughed, nearly stalled, then resumed running rough. The nose rose and the descent slowed. At 1,200 feet, the P40 leveled out, flying upside down at 140 miles per hour. Adair held the attitude for 40 seconds, airspeed increasing to 160 miles per hour as he climbed slowly, 50 feet per minute. But fuel starvation returned, forcing him to roll upright. The damage controls immediately pushed the nose down, and the P40 descended again. He repeated the pattern: flip inverted to climb, flip upright to let fuel flow, flip, climb, flip, descend. The 6 circling Oscars watched in disbelief, an American P40 with a burning engine and damaged controls, alternating between inverted and upright, refusing to crash. One Oscar dove to investigate. Adair spotted it, rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly toward the Japanese fighter. The Oscar broke away. The American pilot seemed either insane or desperate. The Oscars turned east toward Burma, abandoning the chase. Adair continued his rolling climb toward Naguli, his fuel gauge showing 83 gallons and oil pressure still 0. The engine should have seized long ago, but it ran on momentum, friction, and whatever tiny oil film remained on its components. He reached 5,000 feet, spotting Naguli Airfield ahead, the runway, tower, revetments, safety. But a new problem emerged. The landing gear was hydraulic, powered by the engine. With minimal engine power, it might fail at any second. Lowering the gear and losing power would mean crashing short of the runway. A belly landing without gear could rupture fuel tanks and ignite the plane. He needed the gear down and locked before the engine quit. His right hand shook from carbon monoxide poisoning as he pulled the gear lever down. Nothing. The P40's hydraulic system required 1,000 psi, generated by an engine-driven pump that couldn't produce enough pressure. A backup manual hand pump required 28 strokes to lower the gear, but operating it needed both hands. Releasing the control stick would mean losing control. Adair loosened his lap belt, wrapped it around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, and pulled tight, a makeshift rig holding the stick neutral. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and pumped hard. At stroke 23, he felt resistance. At stroke 28, a thud echoed from beneath the cockpit. The left main gear extended and locked, followed by the right. Gear down increased drag, slowing the P40 to 135 miles per hour, still above stall speed, but barely. The engine produced roughly 40% power, just enough to maintain altitude. Nagali's runway was 7 miles ahead, 3 minutes away. His vision tunneled, gray edges closing in from carbon monoxide poisoning. At 2 miles from the runway, the engine quit. The propeller windmilled to a stop. No power, no thrust. The P40 became a poor glider with a normal glide ratio of 8-to-1, 3 miles from 2,000 feet. But battle damage worsened it to perhaps 6-to-1. He wouldn't make the runway. He'd crash short in the jungle. Then he remembered a training tip. Inverted flight could reduce drag and extend glide range. At 1,800 feet, 1 mile from the runway, Adair rolled inverted. Blood rushed to his head, his vision greening, but the descent rate slowed to 500 feet per minute, down from 700. Naguli's tower operators watched in astonishment as an inverted P40 with extended gear approached. On the ground, Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez, a crew chief, watched through binoculars. Thinking it might be a Japanese pilot in a stolen P40, he ran to a .50 caliber machine gun position with 3 other crewmen. Adair was at 400 feet, half a mile from the runway, still inverted. His vision faded. He had 20 seconds of consciousness left. At 200 feet, 300 yards from the threshold, he rolled upright. The damaged aileron pushed the right wing down. He fought the stick to level the wings, pulling back on the broken elevator cables for partial control. The P40 descended toward the runway at a steep angle, nose high, wings wobbling. Martinez's gun crew tracked the plane nervously, their fingers hovering over the trigger. Damaged, smoking, flying erratically, it was impossible to tell if it was friend or foe in those 10 seconds. Martinez hesitated, his eyes fixed on the struggling aircraft, his mind racing. Shooting down an Allied pilot would be a catastrophe. Letting an enemy strafer attack the field would be just as deadly. He made his decision in the blink of an eye, lowering his hand to stop the crew from firing. Adair, oblivious to the drama on the ground, crossed the runway threshold at 90 feet, descending rapidly. Too fast, too steep, the P40's nose high as it fought against the damaged controls. The fighter dropped the last 90 feet in a heart-stopping 4 seconds, the main wheels slamming into the concrete runway with a bone-jarring 7G impact. The gear struts compressed fully, groaning under the force, before the tail wheel slammed down hard. Then with a sickening crunch, the right main gear collapsed, the right wing dropping sharply until the wingtip dug into the runway, sending sparks flying as concrete fragments sprayed outward. The aircraft spun wildly in a 180-degree ground loop, skidding backward for 200 feet before coming to a jarring stop. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment in thick black clouds, and fire crews sprinted toward the downed plane, their hoses already uncoiled. Adair sat motionless for 12 seconds, then unbuckled, stood, and climbed onto the wing, his legs buckling. Ground crew helped him down as Martinez arrived with the fire team. They opened the cowling to find the Allison destroyed, seized pistons, warped crankshaft, ruptured oil pan, coolant everywhere. Together, they counted 16 fuselage bullet holes, 7 in the right wing, 4 in the left. One round had severed the right aileron cable, another punctured the hydraulic reservoir, and a third cut 2 electrical bundles. Lulu Bell would never fly again, but Adair had saved Denjan Airfield. Intelligence confirmed all 24 Sally bombers turned back without dropping ordnance. scattering 15 miles short of target. The 40 Oscars escorted empty bombers back to Burma. 0 bombs hit Allied facilities, 0 ground casualties, and 14 C-47s remained operational. The hump airlift uninterrupted. On December 16, 1943, 10th Air Force Headquarters interviewed Adair, who described his attack, inverted flying technique, and landing. Flight surgeons found elevated carbon monoxide levels in his blood 72 hours later. Severe poisoning that should have rendered him unconscious, yet he'd stayed functional through sheer will. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of U.S. forces in the China-Burma-India theater, awarded Adair the Silver Star. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, engaged and disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft attacking Allied installations, continuing his attack despite severe aircraft damage and personal injury, thereby preventing destruction of critical supply facilities. Adair flew 95 more combat missions with the 81st Fighter Group, becoming an ace with 5 confirmed kills. On his final mission in July 1944, he shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscars over northern Burma. He returned to the U.S. in September 1944, served 30 years in the Air Force, and retired as a full colonel in 1971. The 81st Fighter Group, known as the Burma Banshees, operated until August 1945, destroying 413 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 147 on the ground, losing 63 pilots. Their deaths' head insignia became iconic in the CBI theater. The P-40 Warhawk never achieved the fame of the P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt. It was slower, ineffective above 15,000 feet, and obsolete by 1943. But in the hands of determined pilots like Philip Adair, this rugged Curtiss fighter proved that combat success depends not on aircraft specs, but on the courage and skill of the pilot. 1 pilot, 1 obsolete fighter, 64 enemy aircraft. December 13, 1943. Philip Adair proved impossible odds mean nothing when you refuse to quit. His 11 minutes of alternating inverted and upright flight defied all procedures, and his inverted landing with extended gear was unprecedented and never repeated. That's the story of the Burma Banshees and the day one P-40 pilot disrupted an entire Japanese raid. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit the like button, subscribe for more forgotten heroes, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if anyone in your family served in the CBI theater. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.